I almost didn't make it to that interview. My wife made sure of that. What she never counted on was a dry cleaner, a borrowed blazer, and a folded piece of paper that unraveled 19 months of something I was never supposed to find. Viewers, before you continue, please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories. My name is Peter Luis. I'm a structural engineer based in Columbus, Ohio, and for the past 12 years, I've been the kind of man who shows up early, stays late, and never once asked anyone to hand me something I hadn't already earned 3 times over. I grew up in a small house on the east side of Columbus, the son of a Puerto Rican father who worked construction and a mother who cleaned hotel rooms on double shifts so I could take the SAT prep course the other kids' parents paid for without blinking. We didn't have much. But my father had one rule that never bent: you dress like the version of yourself you're trying to become, not the version you're afraid of staying. He owned one good blazer his entire adult life. Charcoal gray, wool blend, bought secondhand from a tailor on Broad Street. He wore it to every job interview, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that required him to walk into a room and be taken seriously before he opened his mouth. When I passed my professional engineering license exam at 31, I bought my own. A charcoal Hugo Boss, purchased from a department store with the first bonus check I ever received. I've worn it to every significant moment since. The morning I'm about to tell you about, that blazer was hanging on the back of the bedroom door, freshly pressed, ready. I'd been preparing for 3 months for the senior project director interview at Harman & Cole Engineering, a role that would change everything. Double the salary. A title I'd been working towards since before Lala and I were married. I showered, shaved, poured my coffee, and walked toward that door the way my father taught me, like the outcome was already decided and the interview was just the formality. The blazer was gone from the hook. I found it on the bathroom floor, soaking in a puddle of bleach water, a handprint pressed into the fabric like someone had pushed it down and held it there. Ruined. Behind me, my wife Lala walked past the doorway without a word. I carried the blazer into the kitchen the way you carry evidence, carefully, like setting it down wrong might change what it meant. Lala was at the counter in her silk robe, phone face up, scrolling something that kept making her almost smile. She didn't look up when I walked in. I laid the blazer flat on the counter between us and waited. She glanced at it, then back at her phone, then sighed the way people sigh when a child interrupts something important. She said the bucket tipped. She'd been spot cleaning her white blouse the night before and the bleach water just tipped. An accident. She said the word accident the way people say it when they mean inconvenience, flat, unbothered, already moving past it. No apology in her eyes. Just mild irritation that I was still standing there. I told her I had the interview in 4 hours. She nodded slowly and said, "Can't you wear your gray one?" I don't own a gray one. She knew that. We'd lived in the same house for 9 years. She'd seen the inside of my closet 10,000 times. I watched her face when I said I didn't have another blazer. Nothing moved. Not her jaw, not her eyes, not the hand holding the phone. I'd been with Lala 11 years, met her when she was running front of house at a restaurant where I used to take clients. She was sharp and funny and the kind of woman who remembered what everyone ordered without writing it down. I fell hard. But somewhere around year 2 of our marriage, I started noticing a pattern I didn't have language for yet. Whenever I was close to something, a promotion, a bonus, a public recognition, something in our household quietly derailed. A missed alarm. A lost document. A forgotten renewal. I always blamed the timing. I blamed stress. I blamed the universe. I picked up my keys and walked toward the door. Through the living room window, I caught Lala lifting her phone and texting someone. She was smiling. Mr. Yoon's dry cleaning shop sat on a side street 3 blocks from my office, wedged between a nail salon and a phone repair place with a handwritten sign that had been taped to the window so long the tape had gone yellow. I'd been dropping off work shirts there for 6 years. Mr. Yoon was a small, precise man who talked about fabric the way engineers talk about load tolerances. Everything had a threshold, and once you crossed it, you couldn't go back. He held my blazer up to the fluorescent light, turned it once, and shook his head without dramatics. Gone. The bleach had eaten through the fiber. There was nothing underneath the damage worth saving. I stood there in my dress shirt and tie feeling something I hadn't felt since I was 22 and couldn't make rent, like the ground had shifted and I was the only one who noticed. Then Mr. Yoon did something I didn't expect. He disappeared into the back room and came out carrying a navy blazer on a wooden hanger. "Unclaimed," he said. "Customer dropped it off 14 months ago and never returned. Clothes enough to my size." He held it out and said, "You look like a man who needs today to go right." I put it on. The shoulders sat a half-inch wide but the length was close. I thanked him and turned to leave, and that's when something Mr. Yoon said 6 years ago crawled back into my mind fully formed, a thing I'd buried so completely I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. He'd told me once, casually, the way people mention things they assume you already know, that Lala had come in asking how much it cost to permanently ruin a fabric. He said she was curious. He said he thought it was an odd question. I'd laughed. I'd said she was probably asking about a stain. He'd nodded. Neither of us said anything else. I walked to my car, reached into the borrowed blazer's inside pocket to store my phone, and my fingers closed around a folded piece of paper that didn't belong to me. The parking garage under Harmon and Cole's building smelled like concrete and motor oil and the particular kind of silence that exists in places people pass through without stopping. I sat in my car with the engine off and unfolded the paper slowly, the way you open something when part of you already knows you don't want to see what's inside. It was a hotel receipt. The Meridian, downtown Columbus. A 2-night room charge dated 3 weeks prior, a Tuesday and Wednesday. The name printed at the top wasn't the blazer's original owner. It was Calvin Reeves. I knew that name the way you know a song you didn't realize had been playing in the background of your life for over a year. Calvin had moved to Columbus 14 months ago. Lala introduced us at a dinner she arranged at our house: pasta, candles, the good wine glasses she only brought out when she wanted an evening to feel intentional. She said Calvin was like a brother, someone she'd known since college, someone who just needed a city with more opportunity. He was easy to be around. Funny in a low-key way. He came to the house 4 or 5 times over the following months, and on 2 of those visits I'd gone to bed before they finished talking. Once, I woke at 2 a.m. for water and found them in the kitchen, voices low, Lala laughing at something he'd said. She looked up when I walked in and didn't miss a beat, offered me a glass, asked if I wanted to join them. I went back to bed. I made myself believe the only reason it felt strange was because I was tired. The receipt dates lined up exactly with a weekend Lala told me she was visiting her mother in Cincinnati. I sat in that garage for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard the entire time, not thinking, just watching the numbers change. Then I folded the receipt, put it back in the pocket, straightened the borrowed blazer across my shoulders, and walked inside. The conference room on the 14th floor had glass walls on 2 sides and a long table that reflected the skyline. 3 executives sat across from me, 2 men I'd researched and 1 woman I hadn't expected to be running the room. Rosalind Hart, VP of Infrastructure Development, sat in the center chair with a legal pad and a pen she never uncapped. She had the particular stillness of someone who'd spent decades reading people in rooms exactly like this one and had long since stopped being impressed by the ones who came in loud. I sat down, put my portfolio on the table, and pressed my hands flat against the surface the way my father used to press his hands against the dinner table when he needed to feel grounded. Something in me had gone quiet on the walk from the elevator. Not numb, quiet. The kind of focus that lives on the other side of shock, after the adrenaline levels out and what's left is just clarity. They asked me about load-bearing assessments on mixed-use high-rises. They asked me how I managed teams during scope change disputes. They asked me to walk them through a project that went wrong and what I did about it. I answered every question from somewhere I hadn't accessed before, not my rehearsed answers, not the polished talking points I'd practiced in the bathroom mirror for 3 months, but the actual truth of what I knew and how I'd learned it. Rosalind watched me the whole time without writing anything down. Near the end she said, "You seem remarkably composed." I almost told her why. I didn't. My father got laid off 3 times before I turned 15. Every time, he ironed his clothes the night before the next interview and told me that they could take the job but they could not take the way you carry yourself. I spent my whole adult life trying to live inside that sentence and never quite reaching it. Sitting across from Rosalind Hart in a borrowed blazer with a stranger's receipt in the pocket, I finally understood what he meant. She shook my hand at the door and held it a half-second longer than necessary. "We'll be in touch," she said. "Very soon." I returned the blazer to Mr. Yoon that same afternoon. He was locking the front display case when I pushed through the door, and he looked up at me the way he always did, measuring, unhurried, like he was checking whether the garment had held up under pressure. I thanked him for the loan. He nodded and draped the navy blazer over his arm and then stood there a moment, not moving toward the back, not moving toward the register. I asked him again about what he'd told me years ago. About Lala. About the question she'd asked. He didn't flinch. He confirmed it exactly as I remembered. She'd come in curious about permanently ruining fabric, specifically about whether bleach worked faster than other methods, whether the damage would be obvious or gradual. He said she'd seemed almost clinical about it. And then he told me the part he hadn't mentioned before. She'd come back 2 months ago and asked again. Same question, slightly different angle, this time asking whether certain fabrics held stain better than others, whether it could look accidental. He said both times he thought it was strange and both times he told himself it wasn't his business. He looked at me when he said that last part like he was apologizing for the loyalty he'd given the wrong person. I drove home slowly. I took Broad Street instead of the highway because I needed the stoplights. I needed something that would force me to stop every 90 seconds and just breathe. Lala had never been careless. That was the thing rotating in my chest the whole drive. She was the most detail-oriented person I'd ever known. She color-coded the bills. She remembered expiration dates. She could tell you the thread count of every sheet in the house. The blazer on the bathroom floor was not a tipped bucket. It never was. I turned onto our street and reduced my speed without meaning to. Calvin Reeves' car was parked 2 houses down, engine off, the man himself sitting in the driver's seat like he was waiting for something. Or watching for something. I parked in the driveway and did not look at Calvin's car again. I walked inside like I hadn't seen it, like the last 12 hours had been an ordinary Tuesday, like there was no receipt folded in the pocket of a borrowed blazer, like I hadn't just sat across from a dry cleaner who confirmed my wife had researched how to destroy things in a way that looked accidental. Lala was in the kitchen. Cooking. She does that when she's unsettled, not comfort cooking, not the slow Sunday meals she actually enjoys, but the anxious kind, where she picks a complicated recipe and focuses on it so hard she doesn't have to focus on anything else. I recognized it now as a pattern I'd watched for years and named as affection. I sat at the kitchen table and loosened my tie and told her the interview went well. She said good and stirred something without turning around. I asked how her day was. Short answers. Fine. Quiet. Not much. Her phone sat face down on the counter the entire time, which Lala never did. She kept her phone close and unlocked the way some people keep a drink nearby, reflexively, for comfort. We ate dinner. I complimented the food. She looked at me twice during the meal like she was waiting for me to say something specific, like she'd been rehearsing a response to a conversation I hadn't started. I gave her nothing to respond to. After dinner she watched television and I sat beside her, and that was the most frightening hour of my adult life, not because of anger, but because of how well I could perform normal while everything inside me had already changed shape. I waited until her breathing went deep and slow. Then I reached across the nightstand and picked up her phone. She's used my birthday as her password for 7 years. The screen unlocked on the first try. The message thread with Calvin Reeves was near the top. I opened it. I read. I set the phone down exactly where I found it, went to the bathroom, and sat on the edge of the tub in the dark. The messages went back 19 months. I read them twice, once fast, once slow, and both times my hand stayed steady, which frightened me more than shaking would have. This was not a simple affair. What I was reading had architecture. Calvin had been methodically encouraging Lala to steer me away from institutional employment and toward freelance work, independent contracts, no firm behind me, no benefits, no salary floor. There were threads where they discussed my professional trajectory like project managers discussing a timeline. There was a message from 8 months ago where Calvin wrote, "If he gets the director role, everything changes. You know that." Lala's response came back in under 2 minutes, "I know. I'll handle it." There was a separate account, Lala mentioned it by a nickname, the other one, with deposits she referenced obliquely but often enough that the pattern was clear. Withdrawals from our joint account, redirected. 2 years of them. I thought about the life insurance policy I'd taken out when we bought the house, $800,000, Lala listed as sole beneficiary, a form I'd signed without a second thought because that's what you do when you love someone and you're building something together and the future feels long. I thought about it because of the last message in the thread. Sent by Calvin the previous evening, "Is it done?" Lala's reply, timestamped 11:47 p.m., 40 minutes after I'd gone to bed, "Yes." I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time after that. Then I did 3 things. I opened a secondary email account I'd created 3 years ago for client disputes and sent everything to my attorney with a subject line that said urgent and nothing else. I called my sister in Phoenix and left a voicemail that was just her name and the words, "I need you to know I'm okay." She would understand what that meant. And I photographed every screen I could reach. In the morning I woke before Lala, picked up the ruined blazer from the bathroom floor, folded it carefully, and set it on the dresser. Then I went to make coffee and waited. Rosalind Hart called at 10:22 the next morning. I know the exact time because I was watching the kitchen clock when the phone buzzed, the same way I'd watched the dashboard clock in the parking garage, like monitoring something I couldn't control but needed to document. Lala was across the room, leaning against the counter with her own coffee, and when my phone lit up she angled herself slightly toward me without moving her feet, the way people do when they're trying to look disinterested in something they're absolutely watching. I answered. Rosalind offered me the position. Senior Project Director, Harman and Cole Engineering. 178,000 base. Full benefits. Signing bonus. She said the panel was unanimous. I told her I'd need 48 hours to review the written offer and she said of course, "Take your time, we're not going anywhere." She sounded genuinely warm. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there a moment, and Lala asked who it was in the careful voice she used when she already knew the answer to something. I told her. I watched her face the way Mr. Yoon had watched my blazer under the fluorescent light, measuring, looking for what was underneath the surface. What crossed her face was not joy. It was not pride. It was something I can only describe as recalculation. She covered it in under 2 seconds. She said "That's great, babe," and crossed the kitchen and hugged me, and I let her, and I stood there with my arms around my wife of 9 years while everything I'd photographed the night before was sitting in my attorney's inbox in downtown Columbus. By that afternoon my attorney had pulled the financial records. The separate account held $34,000. Every deposit corresponded to a cash withdrawal from our joint account. 26 months of them. Steady. Patient. Planned. That evening, an unknown number sent me a text that said, "Congratulations on the new role, Peter." No name. No context. I stood at the window and read it 3 times. Then I took a screenshot and forwarded it to my attorney without a word. I filed for divorce 19 days after the interview. My attorney moved quickly because the documentation gave her room to, the financial records, the message screenshots, the hotel receipt I'd photographed in the parking garage, the unknown number that my attorney's investigator traced back to a prepaid phone purchased at a drugstore 4 blocks from Calvin Reeves' apartment. The divorce proceedings were not loud. There were no dramatic scenes in hallways, no screaming in lawyers' offices. Lala arrived to the first meeting looking composed and left looking like someone who had just discovered the floor wasn't where she'd thought it was. Calvin Reeves stopped parking on our street the morning after I changed the locks. He texted me once, a long message I didn't read past the first sentence. I started at Harmon and Cole on a Monday in early spring. Rosalind met me at the elevator with a visitor badge and a handshake and said, "We're glad you're here," and I believed her in a way I hadn't believed someone's words in longer than I could accurately measure. I moved into an apartment on the north side of Columbus with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen window that faced east, which meant I got the morning light every day whether I wanted it or not. I kept the ruined blazer. It's folded on the top shelf of my new closet, and I haven't thrown it away, and I can't fully explain why except that sometimes the thing that was meant to stop you is the only proof you have of how far you actually traveled. My father used to say the blazer is the man before the man walks in. What Lala never understood, what Calvin never understood, what I couldn't have told you the morning I found that blazer on the bathroom floor, is that I was never just the blazer. I was everything my father pressed into me on a second-hand tailor's bench on Broad Street, and that doesn't ruin. It doesn't bleach out. It doesn't tip over by accident in the night. The text from the unknown number, I traced it eventually. And what I found attached to that prepaid phone made the affair look like the smallest piece of this story. But that's for another time. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and share for more interesting stories.